Hi, my name is Aaron, and I'm going to be interviewing my cousin Cameron and his friend Noah.
Hello. For the record, we're both just fourth class cadets at the Coast Guard Academy in London.
First question, when did the Coast Guard start?
Eesh. You have to cut this part out, actually.
When did the Coast Guard start?
Well, the Coast Guard was founded in the late 1700s by Alexander Hamilton, and it was originally called the Revenue Cutter Service, where groups of volunteer men and women would go out and respond to a lot of ship crashes because the boats back in those times were very unstable and there'd be a lot of accidents. So it started off as that, and they started enforcing taxes on trade cutters or boats that would come in. So they were under the Department of Treasury, and then later they moved to the Department of Homeland Security. And a fun fact about the Coast Guard history is that they're the longest serving military branch because while the Navy and the Army was formed before, they were disbanded, and the Coast Guard was formed, and the Coast Guard has not been disbanded since then, so they're the longest standing one. It's pretty neat.
The Coast Guard's birthday is August 4, 1790. Under an act of Congress, that's when the Revenue Cutter Service merged with the Life Saving Service and bred the Coast Guard.
Next question, how many types of boats are there?
I'll start this one. So there's a lot of different boats, cutters, and then there's small boats. Cutters are what you would call the big boats. For cutters, there's the types that will go out and patrol and just watch the ocean and what's going on. Then there's types of cutters that will go into places that are filled with ice because those demand different types of cutters with thick hulls so that they can break ice and open up waterways for aids to navigation.
Just trade in general, like routes.
And then there's small boats that do, and there's much more small boats than big cutters because they cost a lot to make those big cutters. The small boats, they perform smaller operations throughout the nation and even outside of the nation.
Next question, how many types of jobs are there?
There's a lot of jobs. So, like any other military branch, there are officers and enlisted personnel. Officers will oversee a more broad type of job, while enlisted personnel have a specific rate they will perform. And these rates range from working on aircrafts or electronics on a cutter, or they will be in charge of cooking, driving the boat, working on the machinery inside the boat. They have specialties for divers to go save people. They have people who jump out of the helicopters. They have, what else, like the cool ones?
And there's even Coast Guard lawyers. There's Coast Guard journalists. Coast Guard teachers teaching, right, the Coast Guard Academy, where we're from. They have people in from the Coast Guard who teach, and so it's just a whole community where every need is met with those jobs. There's a lot of jobs in the Coast Guard.
And we do have a cool rate or a group of people called TACLIT, or just law enforcement, and they're the guys with the guns, and they enforce like migrant interdiction or drug interdiction because a lot of that happens over the water, and the Coast Guard is the one who enforces that.
Next question, what age do you have to be to get into the Coast Guard?
There's a minimum age. I believe that's 17. For the academy, there's a age minimum. You have to be 17 in order to be into the academy. And for enlisted, I think I want to say like 18, 17.
Yeah. Also, along with the age, the Coast Guard has the hardest requirements to get in because they're the smallest branch. Another fun fact, they're smaller than the New York Police Department, their entire personnel. So they have really strict requirements compared to the other branches on like your ASVAB scores, your PFU scores, your criminal backgrounds. And they also have a maximum age to enlist as well.
Next question, what things do you have to do to get into the Coast Guard? Like, are there any like special jobs you have to do, training?
It depends on if you're looking at the enlisted route or the officer route. There's a couple ways to become an officer, and there's pretty much one way to become enlisted, and that's going through Cape May boot camp. From when you're doing enlisted, you can enter straight out of high school. I mean, you don't even necessarily need to have high school diploma to begin enlistment, as long as you're willing to commit yourself at the age that they're allowing you to come in.
But
For officers, the academy or OCS, right? If you're coming out of, we're here at the Coast Guard Academy because we need to have a bachelor's degree in order to become an officer, so that's one requirement. And for OCS, they get their bachelor's outside of the Coast Guard Academy, and they come in and they do a 4-month boot camp, and they become officers.
Next question. What is you guys' job?
As of now, we're just students at the Coast Guard Academy. We're in our freshman year, so we have 3 more to go after this, and then we'll have a 5-year requirement service period. We will graduate as commissioned officers, O1s, ensign, the first rank as an officer. At this point, our job is to do schoolwork, learn leadership skills, management skills, develop our own character and work ethic. So at the academy, what they do is they throw a lot at you, and they expect you to conform and be able to adapt to all the hurdles you have to face.
What is your rank?
Cadet.
4th class cadet.
And last question. How long are you in the Coast Guard for?
How long have we been in the Coast Guard for?
Now, how long are you?
How long we plan on being there?
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to tell right now. A lot of people say they'll get out after their required time, but at the same time, the Coast Guard has the highest retention rate, meaning every branch has a service academy. Air Force, Army, Navy, Merchant Marines, they all have service academies, and they all have mandatory service requirements afterwards. And the Coast Guard has the highest amount of people who stay in past their required time. So they say the life and the quality of life in the Coast Guard is very good.
And last question. What are the different missions?
So the Coast Guard has 11 main missions, which would be search and rescue, where they respond to distress calls from civilian mariners who
Are in distress.
get in accidents. And these can be really stressful because you have to pinpoint where they are. If they lost communications, they use their technology to figure out where they would have drifted to at a certain time, and they send out their small boats and aircraft to go get them.
So, like if a boat sunk.
Correct. There's marine safety.
So that one, marine safety, they take care of the environment, right? There's marine safety, living marine resources, and marine environmental protection. It's all just involving, for example, an oil spill. The Coast Guard has an obligation to clean that up and make sure that it doesn't ruin the environment. Marine safety also just protecting the environment of the animals that are living in the ocean, right? Keeping their home safe and protected. Some other ones that I think are cooler are drug interdiction and migrant interdiction. Right? The Coast Guard will go and search other vessels for drugs or just people who are trying to smuggle themselves into the nation, and are allowed to make arrests and enforce the laws that apply to situations like that. Some other small things, there's ice operations, right? I mentioned earlier how the Coast Guard has those big cutters that go on the ice. So they'll go and one of their missions is to clear paths for people to use vessels over like the Arctic or just really icy places.
Great Lakes in Michigan.
Great Lakes. They have a cutter called the Great Lakes Icebreaker, for example. Its sole purpose stays in Lake Michigan, and it clears up waterways for vessels to track through.
And one more cool thing about it is that the Coast Guard is not just on the U.S. borders, it's also down by the Panama Canal, it's by South Asia, and it's in the Middle East and like Bahrain too.
And they have talk about the officers on the Navy boats.
Oh yeah, and a really cool thing about the Coast Guard or Coast Guard officers is that they're the only people who can enforce the law on the waters without starting a war. So Navy warships will often carry Coast Guard officers. So the Coast Guard officers can board international vessels, can conduct searches, and conduct arrests without
Starting a war with the nation, another nation.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions for them?
No, I think that's it.
I learned a lot. All right.